Secrets don't stay buried forever, especially when they are chained to a concrete wall beneath the feet of Boston's elite. Crystal thought she was just scrubbing floors for billionaires to pay her mother's crushing medical debt. She never expected to find the missing kingpin of the city's underworld. Dusting the 17th century French vases in the Sterling family's Beacon Hill mansion was a task Crystal Higgins performed with mechanical precision. She knew the exact pressure to apply to the porcelain, just as she knew exactly how to blend into the velvet-lined walls of the estate. In the world of Richard and Victoria Sterling, the help was meant to be entirely invisible. Crystal preferred it that way. Invisibility meant safety, and safety meant a steady paycheck. She desperately needed that paycheck. Her mother's ongoing treatments at Brigham and Women's Hospital were draining her meager savings faster than she could replenish them, leaving her one missed shift away from total ruin. Richard Sterling was a titan of East Coast real estate, a man whose philanthropic donations to the Boston Arts Academy were plastered across the society pages every Sunday. He was charming in public, but behind the heavy mahogany doors of his estate, he ran his household with the chilling efficiency of a military dictator. Security was handled not by standard bodyguards, but by heavily armed contractors from a private military firm called Apex Defense Solutions. They patrolled the perimeter with dogs, their earpieces buzzing with constant chatter. Crystal was subjected to bag searches upon entry and exit. There was one absolute rule in the Sterling household, hammered into Crystal's head on her very first day by the head housekeeper. Never go below the wine cellar. The sub-basement was strictly off-limits. Richard claimed it housed a delicate, temperature-controlled server farm for his international trading firm. It was secured by a heavy steel door equipped with a state-of-the-art biometric scanner. Crystal had never given it much thought. She was too exhausted by the endless polishing, washing, and catering to the Sterling's lavish dinner parties to care about what lay beneath the floorboards. Until the night the power grid failed. It was mid-November, and a freak nor'easter had slammed into the Massachusetts coast with terrifying violence. The wind howled through the historic streets of Beacon Hill, snapping ancient tree branches and ripping down power lines. Inside the mansion, the grand crystal chandeliers flickered wildly before dying out completely, plunging the sprawling house into darkness. The backup generators, usually reliable, coughed and sputtered, failing to engage. Panic rippled through the estate. The Apex contractors were scrambling, shouting orders over their radios about a perimeter breach caused by a fallen oak tree that had crushed the wrought iron gates. Richard and Victoria were away at a gala in Manhattan, leaving only a skeleton crew of staff to manage the crisis. "Crystal!" The head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, barked, shining a harsh LED flashlight into Crystal's eyes. "The manual override for the secondary generator is in the breaker room, just past the wine cellar. The guards are dealing with the gate. Go down there and flip the heavy red switch. Now." Crystal hesitated. "But the rule doesn't apply when the pipes are about to freeze and burst, girl. Go!" Swallowing her apprehension, Crystal grabbed a heavy maglite from the kitchen drawer and began her descent. The air grew noticeably colder as she navigated the spiral stone staircase down to the wine cellar. The scent of expensive oak and aged Merlot filled her lungs. She pushed past the rows of vintage Bordeaux, her flashlight beam trembling in the pitch black. At the back of the cellar stood the forbidden steel door. Usually, a small green light pulsed steadily on the biometric panel. Tonight, the panel was dead, completely fried by the power surge. More unnerving, however, was the fact that the heavy door was cracked open just an inch. The electronic deadbolts, reliant on the mansion's main grid, had disengaged. Crystal pushed the door. It groaned on its heavy hinges, protesting the movement. She stepped inside, sweeping her flashlight across the darkness. This was no server room. The air here was damp and smelled heavily of copper, sweat, and something metallic and sharp. There were no humming computers or blinking lights. Instead, the beam of her flashlight hit raw, unpainted concrete. In the center of the room was a heavy steel chair bolted to the floor. Cristal gasped, taking a step back as her light illuminated the figure slumped in the chair. It was a man. His arms were pulled taut behind him, thick iron cuffs biting into his wrists, securing him to the steel frame. He was stripped to the waist, his torso a canvas of dark purple bruises, shallow lacerations, and dried crimson. His head hung low, dark hair matted with sweat obscuring his face. Cristal's hands shook so violently the flashlight beam bounced off the walls. She turned to run, her mind screaming at her to flee, to pretend she had never seen this, to go back upstairs and pack her bags. But her shoe scraped against the loose gravel on the floor. The man's head snapped up. Even battered and exhausted, his eyes were piercing. They were a startling, cold grey, catching the light like shards of fractured glass. He didn't flinch away from the harsh glare of Cristal's flashlight. Instead, he stared her down, analyzing her panic, her maid's uniform, her trembling hands. "You're not one of Sterling's mercenaries," the man rasped. His voice was gravelly, parched from lack of water, yet it carried an undeniable undercurrent of authority. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a statement of fact. Who are you?" Cristal managed to whisper, her voice barely audible over the roaring storm outside. "A dead man. If you tell them you found me," he replied, a grim, humorless smile touching his cracked lips. "But if you're smart, Cristal, I might just be the answer to all your prayers." She froze. "How do you know my name?" "Your name tag," he said dryly, nodding toward her apron. "I'm chained to a wall, sweetheart. I'm not blind." Crystal took a cautious step closer, her mind racing. She recognized him. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had seen his face on the front page of the Boston Globe just 3 weeks ago. The headline had declared him missing, presumed dead in a violent power struggle at the city's docks. He was Gabriel Moretti, the undisputed head of the Moretti Syndicate, a man whispered to control the entire eastern seaboard's underground shipping lanes. The police had been searching for his body in the Charles River. Yet here he was, locked in the basement of a celebrated philanthropist. "You're Gabriel Moretti," Crystal breathed out, her terror compounding. "And Richard Sterling is a dead man walking," Gabriel replied, the grey eyes hardening into steel. "He just doesn't know it yet. Turn the generator on, Crystal. Act natural. But before you go, leave me the flashlight. And if you want to save your own life, you'll come back tomorrow." For the next 24 hours, Crystal moved through the Sterling estate like a ghost haunted by her own thoughts. The power had been restored shortly after she flipped the override switch, and the Apex Guards had secured the damaged perimeter. Richard and Victoria Sterling returned from Manhattan the following afternoon, looking perfectly manicured and deeply unfazed by the storm's aftermath. Watching Richard sip his morning espresso in the sunroom, discussing a multi-million-dollar charity drive for underprivileged youth, made Cristal's stomach churn. The hypocrisy was nauseating. Beneath his Italian leather shoes, a man was chained to a concrete floor, starving and bleeding. Crystal knew she should go to the police, but she also knew that a billionaire with private mercenaries and politicians in his pocket could squash a poor maid from South Boston like a bug. If she went to the authorities, she might disappear just like Gabriel Moretti almost did. Plus, Gabriel's syndicate wasn't exactly known for their mercy. If they found out she was complicit in their boss's torture, even by association, her mother would be left entirely alone. That evening, As the house settled into its quiet, restrictive routine, Crystal made a decision that would alter the trajectory of her life forever. She slipped into Victoria Sterling's private en-suite bathroom. Victoria was a known hypochondriac, and her medicine cabinet rivaled a small pharmacy. Crystal quietly slipped a bottle of high-grade, broad-spectrum antibiotics into her apron pocket, along with medical gauze, surgical tape, and a small pair of titanium scissors. From the kitchen pantry, she smuggled 2 bottles of purified water and a high-protein energy bar. Getting back into the sub-basement required nerve she didn't know she possessed. The biometric lock on the steel door had been repaired by the Apex technicians that morning. However, while dusting the security office earlier that day, Crystal had noticed something crucial. The technicians had left the system in maintenance mode for a 48-hour diagnostic cycle, meaning a physical master key, kept on a hook right by the guard's desk, could manually override the scanner. Waiting until the night shift guard stepped out for his mandatory cigarette break on the terrace, Crystal swiped the brass key, crept down to the wine cellar, turned the lock, and slipped inside, pushing the heavy door shut behind her. Gabriel was exactly where she had left him. He looked worse. The bruising on his ribs had darkened to a terrifying shade of black, and his breathing was shallow. Yet, as Crystal approached, he lifted his head, that same dangerous intelligence burning in his grey eyes. "I was beginning to think you took the coward's way out, Crystal," Gabriel said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm not a coward," she shot back, her voice shaking as she unscrewed the cap of a water bottle. "But I am terrified. Drink this, slowly." She brought the bottle to his lips. Gabriel drank greedily, coughing as the water hit his parched throat. When he finished, he rested his head back against the steel chair, closing his eyes for a brief moment. "Why did you come back?" he asked, watching her as she tore open the medical gauze. "Because I need to know why Richard Sterling has the head of the Mafia locked in his basement," Crystal said, dabbing at the laceration on his shoulder. Gabriel hissed in pain but didn't pull away. "Sterling isn't just a real estate mogul," Gabriel explained, his voice gaining a fraction of its strength. "His shipping companies, his overseas charity organizations, they are fronts. He's the premier money launderer for the Vasquez cartel out of Colombia. But recently, Sterling got greedy. He decided laundering wasn't profitable enough. He started using his private jets and container ships to move human cargo. Trafficking." Crystal stopped wiping his wounds, feeling the blood drain from her face. "Human trafficking? My syndicate handles gambling, extortion, contraband," Gabriel said, his eyes locking onto hers. "We are criminals, Crystal. I won't lie to you about what I am. But we draw a line. When I found out Sterling was moving women through my docks, I ordered my men to burn his shipments and shut his operation down. Sterling didn't like that. He bought off 2 of my lieutenants, ambushed me at a sit-down, and dragged me here. He's torturing me to get the access codes to my syndicate's offshore accounts. Once he has them, he'll kill me, take my empire, and expand his trafficking ring." Crystal stared at him. The sheer scale of the evil operating above her head was paralyzing. "Why hasn't he killed you yet?" "Because I haven't given him the numbers," Gabriel smirked, though it looked more like a grimace. "And I have a very high tolerance for pain." "I have to get you out of here," Crystal whispered, the reality of the situation finally snapping her into focus. This wasn't just about saving a criminal, it was about stopping a monster. "You can't. The cuffs are solid iron. The locks are high-security cores," Gabriel said. "But you can help me tear his life apart." He leaned forward, as much as the chains would allow. "Listen to me closely. You are invisible in this house. You have access to his office, his trash, his private spaces. I need a phone, a burner, and I need you to find a red leather ledger hidden somewhere in his master study. It contains the shipping manifests for the Vasquez cartel. If they catch me snooping, they'll kill me, Cristal said, her heart hammering against her ribs. If you do this, Gabriel countered, his voice dropping to a smooth, persuasive timbre that sent a shiver down her spine. I will ensure your mother has the best medical care in the world. I will wipe her hospital debt to zero before the week is out. I will give you a life where you never have to scrub another man's floor. He was offering her the world, and all it would cost was her life if she failed. How do I know I can trust a Mafia boss? She asked, her chin lifting defensively. Because a Mafia boss's currency is his word, Gabriel replied softly. And right now, Cristal, I am putting my life in your small, trembling hands. We are partners now. Cristal finished bandaging his ribs, her mind made up. She packed the remaining supplies into her apron. I'll look for the ledger tomorrow during his afternoon meetings. I can get a burner phone from a bodega in Southie before my shift. Careful, Cristal, Gabriel warned as she turned toward the door. Sterling is paranoid. If he smells a rat, he'll burn the whole house down to catch it. Cristal nodded, slipping out of the steel door and locking it behind her. She meticulously returned the master key to the hook in the security office, her hands steadying. She had a mission now. But as she rounded the corner of the grand hallway, leading to the servants' quarters, the breath left her lungs. Standing at the end of the hall, wearing a silk dressing gown and holding a crystal glass of bourbon, was Victoria Sterling. Her sharp, predatory eyes were locked directly on Cristal. "Cristal, dear," Victoria purred, taking a slow sip of her drink. "Whatever were you doing, creeping around the security office at this hour?" Cristal's heart slammed against her ribcage with enough force to bruise, but she forced her facial muscles to relax into the submissive, apologetic mask she wore every day. Victoria Sterling stood before her, the ice clinking softly against the crystal of her bourbon glass. "I was checking the security logs for the perimeter windows, Mrs. Sterling," Cristal lied, her voice appropriately deferential. "During the storm, the latch on the East Wing conservatory gave way. I wanted to ensure the Apex guards had logged the repair. I apologize for being out of my quarters so late." Victoria's gaze swept over Cristal, cold and calculating, like a jeweler assessing a flawed diamond. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, Victoria took another sip. "See that you don't make a habit of roaming, Cristal. The security team has a shoot-first protocol during high alert periods. It would be a tragedy to have to replace a maid who knows exactly how I like my silk pressed." "Yes, ma'am." "Good night, ma'am." Cristal retreated to her small room in the servants' wing, collapsing onto her narrow bed. She didn't sleep a wink. The stakes were no longer just about losing her job, they were about surviving the week. At dawn, before her shift officially began, Cristal took the tea to a grimy bodega on Dorchester Avenue in Southie. She bypassed the regular electronics and bought a prepaid track phone from behind the counter, paying in crumpled cash. She wrapped it in a plastic grocery bag and buried it at the bottom of her purse, right beneath a bundle of fresh dust rags. The estate was buzzing when she returned. Richard Sterling was hosting a closed-door luncheon with several high-profile Boston city councilors and a prominent state judge, Arthur Langdon. Apex contractors were stationed at every entrance. It was the perfect distraction. With the household staff focused on catering the dining room, Cristal slipped away to the second floor. Richard's master study was a testament to new money trying to look old. Dark mahogany paneling, leather-bound first editions that had never been read, and the heavy scent of scotch and imported tobacco. Gabriel had given her explicit instructions. Sterling thinks he's a mastermind, but he's a creature of habit. Check the humidor on the credenza. Cristal locked the heavy oak door behind her and approached the credenza. A massive, glass-topped humidor sat squarely in the center, filled with rare Cuban cohibas. She carefully removed the cigars, setting them on a velvet cloth. Pressing her thumbs against the interior cedar lining, she felt a slight give. With a soft click, the false bottom popped up. Beneath the wood lay a slim, crimson leather notebook, the red ledger. Crystal opened it, her eyes scanning the meticulously handwritten columns. It wasn't just a list of shipping containers and offshore accounts linked to the Vasquez cartel. There were names, politicians, Port Authority directors, and right there in black ink, Judge Arthur Langdon, the man currently eating Dover sole in the dining room below. The ledger detailed payments made to ensure the Boston Harbor patrols looked the other way on specific dates. It was a masterclass in systemic corruption. She shoved the ledger into the deep pocket of her apron, replaced the false bottom, and meticulously arranged the cigars exactly as she had found them. Getting back to the sub-basement was riskier during the day, but the maintenance cycle on the biometric lock was still active. Crystal timed her descent with the changing of the guard, slipping through the heavy steel door just as the hallway cameras completed their slow pan. Gabriel looked worse, his skin pale and slick with a feverish sweat. The infection from his lacerations was setting in, despite the antibiotics. Yet, when Cristal pulled the red ledger and the burner phone from her apron, a terrifying, triumphant light ignited in his grey eyes. "You are a marvel, Crystal Higgins," he murmured, his cracked lips pulling into a genuine smile. "Call your people," she urged, stepping close to hold the phone to his ear, since his hands were still shackled behind the heavy steel chair. "Tell them to get you out of here before Sterling realizes this is gone." Gabriel nodded, dialing a long sequence of numbers from memory. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "It's me," Gabriel said, his tone instantly shifting from exhausted prisoner to absolute commander. "I'm in the Beacon Hill estate, sub-basement. Sterling is a dead man. Silvio, listen to me carefully. You need to mobilize the Blackwood crew. Heavy breach." Cristal listened as Gabriel rattled off the security protocols, guard rotations, and structural weak points of the mansion he had somehow deduced while chained in the dark. He was a brilliant, lethal tactician. "And Silvio?" Gabriel added, his eyes locking onto Cristal's. "There's a girl, a maid, dark hair, blue eyes. Her name is Cristal. If a single stray bullet comes within 10 feet of her, I'll take your head myself. 2 hours. Be ready." Gabriel ended the call. Cristal lowered the phone, her hands trembling. "They're coming?" "With everything we have," Gabriel confirmed. "Now give me the ledger. I need to know exactly what leverage Sterling thought he had." Crystal opened the book to the most recent pages and held it up to the dim light of her flashlight. Gabriel read in silence for a long moment, his brow furrowing. Then a dark, humorless chuckle vibrated in his chest. "What is it?" Cristal asked. "I underestimated them," Gabriel said, his eyes darkening with a terrifying rage. "Sterling isn't the architect of the trafficking ring. Look at the authorization signatures at the bottom of the cargo manifests. The initials." Crystal squinted at the elegant, looping cursive. "V.S. Victoria," Crystal gasped, the blood draining from her face as she remembered the cold, predatory look in the woman's eyes the night before. "Richard is just the public face, the money launderer. Victoria is the mastermind," Gabriel growled. "She's the one running the Vasquez connection. And if she's as ruthless as this ledger implies, she already knows you're in here." The heavy steel door of the sub-basement groaned, the locking mechanism disengaging with a loud, electronic chirp. Cristal spun around. Standing in the doorway, flanked by two heavily armed Apex contractors holding Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine guns, was Victoria Sterling. She was wearing a pristine white cashmere sweater, holding Cristal's discarded track phone wrapper in one hand and a suppressed silver pistol in the other. "I knew it," Victoria smiled, stepping into the damp room. "You always were too smart to just be polishing silver, Cristal." The silence in the sub-basement was deafening, broken only by Gabriel's ragged breathing. Victoria stepped closer, the heels of her Louboutins clicking sharply against the raw concrete. She looked immaculate, entirely out of place in the dark, blood-stained torture chamber she had secretly overseen. "Check her," Victoria ordered. A mercenary violently grabbed Cristal by the arm, yanking the red leather ledger from her apron and handing it to Victoria. "A disappointing development," Victoria sighed, tracing the crimson cover. "Richard is an idiot. I told him to burn this. Men are so sentimental about their leverage." She sneered down at Gabriel. "And you, Mr. Moretti, I hoped your legendary pain threshold would break tonight. I need those offshore accounts to expand my European roots." "You're not expanding anywhere," Gabriel spat, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. "You deal in human lives. For that alone, I'm burying you under this foundation." Victoria laughed, a chilling, high sound. Brave words from a chained man. "Kyle, shoot the maid. Use the incinerator. Then bring out the blowtorch for Mr. Moretti." Kyle raised his MP5, the cold barrel aimed squarely at Cristal's chest. She squeezed her eyes shut, her mind flashing to her sick mother, lying in a hospital bed across the city. She had tried to do the right thing, and it had cost her everything. Suddenly, the room plunged into total darkness. The emergency LED lights died instantly. Above them, a heavy breaching charge shook the ceiling, sending a thick cloud of dust cascading down. "What was that?" Victoria shrieked, her composed facade completely shattering. "Kale, tactical lights!" Before the guard could react, the heavy steel door blew off its hinges with a deafening concussive blast that threw Cristal to the floor. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard the suppressed thwip, thwip, thwip of professional gunfire. Red laser sights sliced the dusty dark. Kyle and the second guard slumped heavily to the concrete, neutralized before they could even pull their triggers. Victoria screamed, firing her silver pistol blindly into the shadows, but a heavy boot kicked it from her hand. "Boss!" Silvio's gruff voice called out. "Over here. Get these chains off," Gabriel commanded. Flashlights illuminated 4 men in tactical gear. Silvio snapped the thick iron cuffs with heavy bolt cutters. Gabriel stood, swaying slightly as his abused muscles protested, but sheer adrenaline and fury kept him upright. Accepting a Glock 19, he locked eyes with Victoria, who was now securely pinned against the wall. "You brought a war to my house," Victoria hissed in terror. "You brought it to my docks," Gabriel countered smoothly. "Silvio, secure the ledger. Hand them over to our FBI contacts anonymously. The feds will tear their lives down to the studs. They'll spend their days in a supermax, waiting for cartel assassins." Gabriel holstered his weapon and knelt beside Cristal. The ruthless Mafia kingpin vanished, replaced by a man gazing at her with profound, unwavering respect. Gently, he tilted her chin up. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. "No," she breathed, tears of relief spilling over her lashes. "Come with me," Gabriel offered his hand. "Your shift is over, Cristal." She took it without hesitation. As he steadied her against his side, they walked out of the ruins of the Beacon Hill mansion, stepping past a weeping Richard Sterling, bound in zip ties. 2 weeks later, the scandal broke like a tidal wave. Front-page exposés detailed the Sterling's massive human trafficking and money laundering operations. The Red Ledger proved to be the ultimate silver bullet, dismantling the Vasquez cartel's entire East Coast network. Crystal sat in a sunlit waiting room at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Dr. Aris entered, looking perplexed but pleased. "Ms. Higgins, your mother's entire balance, over $400,000, was wired this morning from a Cayman trust. Furthermore, a private fund will cover all future experimental treatments." Crystal smiled, finally weightless. It's a miracle. Leaving the hospital, Crystal stepped into the crisp Boston air. A sleek black Maybach idled by the curb. The tinted window rolled down smoothly to reveal Gabriel Moretti. Dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, his bruises healing, he radiated untouchable power, yet his grey eyes softened instantly when they found hers. "Get in, Crystal," Gabriel said, opening the door. "We have dinner reservations at Menton. We need to discuss your new future." She didn't hesitate. Stepping into the car, she left the life of an invisible maid behind forever. She had descended into the dark to find a monster, but instead found a king, and together they had brought down an empire. If you enjoyed this thrilling dive into the dark side of high society and underworld romance, don't forget to smash that like button. Share this intense story with your friends who love a good plot twist, and hit subscribe for more gripping, real-life inspired audio dramas every week.